Grace and peace to you from the one who was and is to come. Amen. In Reforesting Faith, Matthew Sleeve invites us to take a forest walk through the Bible. What do trees teach us about the nature of God and God's love for us? Sleeve is the executive director of Blessed Earth, a ministry which seeks to promote understanding of the biblical mandate to care for God's creation. His study of trees in the Bible attempts to show how to love trees is not something pagan or druidic. The epigraph of the book underlines the urgency of his quest. Every tree has its enemy. Few have an advocate. Sleeve's biblically based advocacy for trees is directed especially at more evangelical Christian circles, whose focus is on spreading the good news of the gospel while neglecting the call of being good stewards of the earth. While I do not share some of his theological assumptions, his detailed study of the importance of trees in the Bible is persuasive and an eye-opener. Our faith clearly needs to be reforested. The writer Maria Popova reminds us that since the dawn of our species, trees have been our silent companions, permeating our most enduring tales and never ceasing to inspire fantastical cosmogonies. The writer and poet Hermann Hesse praises them as gifted preachers. But they are more than wisdom teachers. Without them, we will not be able to survive. And as much as we depend on trees, they would be better off without us. By now, we all understand a tree's role in the global oxygen, carbon, and water cycles. Trees grow older, taller, and bigger than anything else on the earth. Without their sap, bark, wood, flowers, and fruits, we would not be able to live. It is during the night that they draw a deep breath of carbon dioxide molecules from the air and bind them together with water using the sun's energy. As a result, life-giving oxygen is exhaled and sugar produced. It was not until the 1770s that this link between trees and our breathing was discovered. And it was only when anatomists were able to make a cast of the tubes leading into a human lung that a similar respiratory architecture was discovered. A bronchogram reveals the shape of a bare oak tree. Our bodies house a beautiful tree of life which is in constant exchange with the trees of a forest. One can only marvel at such resemblance and symbiosis. The beautiful and life-giving presence of trees has been an inspiration to many poets and writers. We cannot overestimate the gift that they are to us. No wonder then that writers like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien cast the heroes of their stories as the protectors of trees. Their protagonists treasure trees and even talk to them. In 2008, the Japanese graphic designer and book artist Katsumi Komagata released his pop-up book, Little Tree, in which he traces the life cycle of a single tree to explore the cycle of all life. The book was inspired by a young child who lost her beloved father, one of Komagata's own dear friends. The child struggled to make sense of life and death. As the story unfolds, each page offers a different stage of the tree's growth. It is an invitation to come to terms with death in order to live more fully. And it is done in conversation with a tree, a faithful companion. In our own Judeo-Christian tradition, trees are woven into our sacred text, from beginning to end. They pop up repeatedly and at a frequency that caught me by surprise. For when we talk about trees, we're also talking about fruits, seeds, roots, branches, and leaves. And if we do not limit the scope to living trees alone, but include all the things that come from trees, such as rods, walking sticks, staves, wooden, ladders, and the cross, then the presence of trees in our sacred stories is quite astounding. Trees are faithful witnesses and companions of well-known characters and events in our Bible. What would the Garden of Eden be without the tree of life and the tree of knowledge? Noah received the leaf of an olive tree to signal a new beginning. Abraham and Sarah sat under the oaks of Mamre when they welcomed the three angels disguised as strangers. Moses stood barefoot in front of the burning bush when he was tasked to lead his people into freedom. Jacob dreamed of a ladder in the place of luz, which in Hebrew means almond trees. And when Jacob blesses his 12 sons at the end of his life, he says about Joseph, he is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. The book of Leviticus sets up guidelines that guarantee what we would call today sustainable agriculture. A newly planted tree, for example, was not to be harvested for the first 3 years. Fruit trees were not to be beaten twice. It meant that the harvesting of almonds, olives, and dates were to be done only once, so that some of the remaining fruits and nuts could be gleaned by foreigners, orphans, and widows. And every 7 years, trees were not to be harvested at all. The greater long-term good needed to be protected against greedy short-term profit. And even in the most desperate circumstances, such as in a time of war, people were not allowed to cut down a fruit tree. When the sages of the book of Proverbs praise God's wisdom, they exclaim, "She's a tree of life to those who take hold of her. To those who hold her fast will be blessed." In the book of Psalms, the righteous are praised to be like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season. And when Jacob in his suffering is at his lowest, he wished that he were a tree. For there is hope for a tree. If it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though its root grow old in the earth, and its stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud and put out branches like a young plant. We now know how trees manage to come back to life. It is thanks to webs of interconnecting fungal growths that living trees are able to supply fallen trees with sap and chlorophyll. It is the miracle of a cut-down tree coming back to life that fills Job with hope. And the great prophet Isaiah speaks to his people of the future hope of the Messiah also by choosing the example of a cut-down tree. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And when Isaiah envisions the great homecoming from exile, he pictures a desert in bloom, covered with cedar, acacia, myrtle, olive trees, cypresses, plane and pine trees. We are to imagine a triumphant processional that involves all of creation. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Trees are faithful companions. They promised new life to Noah. They offered hospitality to Abraham and Sarah, turning them into perfect hosts for angels. They marked the place where Jacob dreamed, a ladder connecting heaven and earth. They inspired Israel's sustainable agriculture to think long-term and to not be tempted by short-term profit. Their stature and beauty were seen to best embody the gift of God's wisdom and best describe those seeking a life of justice. They comforted Job and rejoiced with Isaiah. They know that there's a season for everything. Trees were also known to be places of divine calling. Think of Gideon, Nathaniel, and Zacchaeus. The church father St. Augustine was sitting under a fig tree when he heard the voice of a child chanting, "Take and read, take and read." When he opened the Bible by a random page and started to read, he experienced a profound conversion. And the great reformer Martin Luther is said to have encountered God when seeking shelter under a tree during a violent thunderstorm. Jesus himself compared something as large and mysterious as the kingdom of God to a small seed growing into a big tree in which birds find a place to nest. His parables abound with seeds, trees, branches, and vines. The book of nature spoke to Jesus about God's commitment to bring justice and peace to the world. And when he himself needed to find refuge and silence, he gathered his disciples among the olive grove. It was on Mount of Olives, when standing at the crossroads in his life and ministry, that Jesus tried to connect with his God in prayer. On Good Friday, Jesus was nailed to a wooden cross. The Roman Empire was known to use and abuse trees for thousands of brutal crucifixions. After his resurrection, Jesus is mistaken for a gardener. John portrays Jesus as the new Adam who will bring about a new creation. And according to the book of Revelation, the new creation will be a place where the leaves of a tree will heal all the nations. One could write a whole theology based on the meaning and symbolism of trees, starting with the tree of life in Genesis and ending with the tree of life in Revelation. With every year, our beautiful planet Earth encircles the sun. A new ring of life is added to every tree. But sadly, our anthropocentric view of the world has put our life-giving trees at risk. The one who exclaimed to be the true vine and who proclaimed himself as the one who gives us access to the tree of life, keeps summoning us to love God and our neighbor. And the question of who our neighbor is keeps pushing the boundaries of who we consider worthy of our love and care. As eccentric as tree hugging might seem to the majority of people, it reveals an ancient wisdom. We are dependent on each other and deeply interconnected. We breathe in the tree's gift of the life-giving oxygen as they breathe in the waste of our carbon dioxide. It is an extraordinary exchange and a wondrous symbiosis. I wonder when we will be ready to include hugging and caring for a tree as another valid expression of loving our neighbor as ourselves. And trees keep on giving. They do not do so at every stage of their lives. Even when cut down, they provide us with the kind of material that helps us build, for example, chairs and tables, cupboards and roofs. Or think of all the beautiful instruments made of wood. Some refer to them as singing trees. Sleeve reminds us that no other part of this planet's ecosystems has so much utility both in life and in death. An apparently of all the creatures on earth who live in or on trees, including trees that are dead. A tree that has fallen in the forest may support several thousand flora and fauna species throughout the course of its decomposition. And even our great proud cities rely on trees. Trees help to prevent floods and make drinking water clean. They encourage biodiversity and conserve water. They offer shade and cooling in summer. They keep the air clean, reduce greenhouse effect, and keep noise levels down. In their beauty and presence, lift our spirits. Matthew Sleeve therefore rightly asks, will we heed the call to protect trees? Will we plant a small tree today that the next generation will climb and the following one will find shade under? Will we plant in faith? Will we be called oaks of righteousness? It is a matter of perspective. The artist Katsumi Komagata challenges our perspective with his gentle genius. Maria Popova notices how the artist casts the shadows of all peripheral characters and objects. A street lamp, a man walking his dog, a bird, not from the perspective of the reader, but from that of the tree, appearing upside down on the page. Komagata's spatial perspective is meant to shed new light on our own existential perspective. Is love not also about a change of perspective? What would it mean to see the world from the vantage point of a tree? We don't need more wonders. We need a greater sense of wonderment. William Blake echoes such sentiment when he notes in one of his letters, the tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. But Maria Popova reminds us that trees are much more than what they are to us or for us or in relation to us. She describes them as relational miracles all their own, which are in fact in constant communication with one another. Is it then not more than poetic freedom when our sacred texts imagine trees to clap their hands and shout for joy? Science has discovered that trees have their own unique way of communicating. Let the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming to judge the earth. It is interesting to note that such shouts of joy are heard when the trees get their day in court, when God finally establishes justice in the world. Their voices will no longer be silenced, and the verdict will be in their favor. The book of Judges even presents us with a parable about trees coming together to anoint a king for themselves. The meeting ends with a big argument between an olive tree, a fig tree, a vine, and a thorn bush. It is thanks to tree scientists that we have come to realize that trees really do communicate. They count, share resources, and talk with each other using a system dubbed the Wood Wide Web. The richness of their connectedness is therefore more than metaphorical. They are entangled in complex symbiotic webs of interbeing. In his book The Hidden Life of Trees, the forester Peter Wohlleben explores the tree's secret world of signals, which enables them to communicate complex information via smell, taste, and electrical impulses. Theirs is a silent but truly sophisticated language. According to Maria Popova, we are only just beginning to understand non-human consciousness. Trees are our oldest companions, but we do have taken them for granted for too long and not paid enough attention to their crucial role in enabling life on this planet. Wohlleben shares about his journey from using trees as mere commodity to seeing them as living wonders. Cut-down trees, for example, should not be able to still be alive after centuries. They need leaves to perform photosynthesis, which allows them to convert sunlight into sugar for sustenance. So from where are the nutrients coming for hundreds of years? Scientists discovered that such assisted living was made possible through intertwined roots or by growing fungal networks around the roots. These fungal networks resemble a sort of extended nervous system that allow neighboring trees to be connected with each other. And what is just as astounding is the apparent ability of trees to distinguish their own roots from those of other species and even of their own relatives. Trees have clearly understood the advantage of working together. This astonishing sociality of trees abounds with the kind of wisdom that nurtures strong human communities and societies. For a tree can be only as strong as the forest that surrounds it. On its own, a tree cannot establish a consistent local climate. It is at the mercy of wind and weather, but together many trees create an ecosystem that moderates extremes of heat and cold, stores a great deal of water and generates a great deal of humidity. And in this protective environment, trees can live to be very old. To get to this point, the community must remain intact no matter what. If every tree were looking out on for itself, then quite a few of them would never reach old age. Such wisdom and insight offers a whole new perspective on Jesus' statement that he is the vine and we are the branches. Discipleship is not just about working together, but at a more fundamental level about recognizing our interdependence. We cannot live without trees. Their presence is life-giving. Their wisdom inspires. Their interconnectedness models sociality. Tree planting has therefore become an urgent project across the world. It is one way to bless the earth, and it was also one aspect of Abraham and Sarah's calling to be a blessing to future generations. For once Abraham arrived in Canaan and entered into a peace treaty with one of the local kings, he started to plant a grove in Beersheba. Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. This is the first biblical record of a human planting trees. The Hebrew word used for grove can be interpreted as a grove of tamarisk trees. Tamarisk trees grow well in arid climates, and they can even survive in areas of high salinity around the Dead Sea. The trees have a method of secreting salt and misting the area around themselves with water droplets. In so doing, they create a naturally cooled mini-climate. Abraham and Sarah were called to be a blessing to the world. Tree planting can be one expression of such calling. The grove becomes a sanctuary for Abraham and his family to worship God. To plant is an act of faith, hope, and love. It is to think not just about oneself, but about future generations. Such long-term thinking is about sustainable living, and it has to involve conversations not just with God as the source of all life and love, but also with those who will inherit the earth from us. It is therefore interesting to note that our Old Testament ends with the prophet Malachi's warning about the threat of destruction. He suggests that the only way to avoid it is to engage in intergenerational conversations. The hearts of the parents need to be turned to their children, and the hearts of children need to be turned to their parents. To have these kind of conversations under the trees is to be inspired by the way living trees bridge generations, connect us with the past, and invite us to dream of a different future. The earth is entrusted to us, and when we hand it on to the next generation, should it not be in as good or better shape than we received it? Tree planting can be ritualized and mark important thresholds, like the birth of a child, the passing of a loved one, or a special anniversary. To do so is to keep Abraham's legacy alive and to be a blessing to the earth. After all, trees are home to 1/2 of all the creatures that live on land. The United Congregational Church of Southern Africa recently launched the ambitious project of planting 500,000 trees. Every member has been asked to plant a spekboom tree or another indigenous tree. To what extent tree planting is a form of resistance and empowerment is beautifully illustrated by the story of Wangari Maathai, the woman who planted millions of trees. This Kenyan activist was the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. She turned to trees as an instrument of civil disobedience, empowerment, and emancipation, advancing democracy, human rights, and environmental justice. She founded the Green Belt movement and is responsible for planting 30 million trees. She empowered women to take part in social change, advocating for ecologically viable social, economic, and cultural development. Despite being beaten and imprisoned many times, she did not stop her activism, but courageously kept pushing for change. Her resistance helped defeat Kenya's corrupt authoritarian president and blazed a new path to ecological resilience. She realized that a nation's well-being depends on healing the broken relationship between a broken economy and a broken ecology. She became known as Mama Miti, the mother of trees, and was later elected to the new parliament and appointed Assistant Minister of Environment, Natural Resources and Wildlife. Her remarkable story is told by the French children's poet author Frank Prévost and illustrator Aurelia Fronti. It is one of the most inspiring picture books biographies of cultural heroes. The story begins with the economic and ecological devastation caused by the British colonialists and takes us all the way to her founding the Green Belt movement. Her insistence on women's leadership was countercultural, and she persisted, entrusting tree nurseries to local women and seeding in them a newfound sense of civic agency. She modeled for the rest of the world a new form of civic agency, standing up for nature and humanity as an indivisible whole. As children of Abraham and Sarah, we too are called to be a blessing with something as practical as planting trees. May such planting inspire intergenerational conversations and keep the memory and vision of Wangari Maathai alive. And may the reforesting of our faith summon and empower us to be protectors of trees. And so, as you leave from here, may the blessing of the great rains be on you, to beat upon the spirit, and wash it fair and clean, and leave there many a shining pool, where the blue of heaven shines, and sometimes a star. Amen.